Hi, everyone. This is Judy from the Back to Love movement, and I'm totally thrilled and honored to have Paula Chiarmonte with me today. Paula is a neurofeedback and biofeedback practitioner advocating for optimal brain health and emotional resilience. Holding a master's degree and certified in transformational healthcare leadership from UCLA, she is a preferred facilitator with PSYCH-K International. Following study with Bruce Lipton and Rob Williams in California, Paula established her whole brain balancing biofeedback practice in 2013. Based on Bruce Lipton's epigenetics theory featured in his book, The Biology of Belief, PSYCH-K blends neuroscience, evolutionary biology, and positive psychology for transformational subconscious change. Welcome, Paula.
Thanks, Judy. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad you joined me. I want to ask you if you could please tell us about your background and practice. I mean, 2013, that's quite a long time.
It is. It's over almost 12 years now. I studied in 2011 back in California with Bruce and Rob Williams as the founder of PSYCH-K directly. And, this is essentially my encore career. I've had several careers beforehand. I'm a former management consultant and research analyst, and probably because I was in public health. So I learned about epigenetics, which Bruce Lipton really is the pioneer founder of epigenetics back in the 70s. And, it really interested me. I think a lot of us are kind of fascinated by DNA as, divine natural access to our fundamental humanity. And I just thought it was so cool. And I'm not really, very science oriented, but I thought, wow, why doesn't everybody know about this? How can we harness this? Well, shortly thereafter, I learned about PSYCH-K. PSYCH-K was something I'd never heard of. I thought it was kind of a goofy word. I didn't know what it meant, and I'll define it later. But the point is, Rob Williams, the founder of PSYCH-K, actually applies Bruce Lipton's epigenetics scientific theory so that we can really change our lives by activating our genes in a positive direction, and specifically working with the subconscious mind. So that's, kind of the gist of it. I never thought I'd be doing this kind of work, and but it became a calling after training for several years, and here I am. So that's really how I came to it. And I really like to credit Bruce and Rob because, they're such iconic figures, especially Bruce Lipton. There's nobody, that hasn't heard of Bruce Lipton, and particularly the publication, The Biology of Belief, really was groundbreaking 50 years ago. And now science is just starting to understand the implications of DNA.
Right. And how blessed you were that you got to study with them both.
Oh, it was an incredible opportunity. And, at the time, I just didn't have a clue. I mean, I really didn't, but I just went on faith, and, it completely changed my life, first of all. And secondly, it completely opened up this new career, which I don't really consider it so much a career as it's more like a calling. It's more like really service. That's how I like to think of it.
Yeah, helping people.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot. So what is the purpose of PSYCH-K balance?
Well, thank you for asking. First of all, I like to define it because PSYCH-K, it's spelled PSYCH-K. PSYCH-K stands for psychological kinesiology, which is kind of a mouthful of syllables, but basically it's most people are familiar with muscle testing. Many people, applied kinesiology, educational kinesiology, where we use the central nervous system to gauge electrical signals that give us a yes or a no. I mean, that's the gist of it. And so PSYCH-K, it's an abbreviation for psychological kinesiology because it addresses the psyche directly, the subconscious mind specifically, and then it utilizes muscle testing or applied kinesiology to gauge those electrical signals. So it's very different from traditional talk therapy. It's very different from some of the older generation deep change techniques like hypnotherapy, even EFT tapping, EMDR, rapid eye movement, and they're all valid. And, I know because I've done them all. But this is a next generation. It's a new version of deep change, subconscious transformational deep change. And the reason it's so important, I feel, for our times is because it's a lot easier, quicker, very affordable, and accessible. Children, people that are disabled, elders, if you can move a little bit, and if you really have the desire to change, you can definitely benefit from PSYCH-K. It's not some, complicated, difficult, challenging thing to do. So, but that's what it stands for, PSYCH-K stands for. And, as I said, it's a deep change technique. It features brain integration, and I'll get to that a little bit later on.
Okay, so let me ask you this. So if someone has something physically wrong or emotionally wrong, it'll work for either one of those? Or
Yeah,
both?
that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. We work essentially with both the brain and the mind. And because of my background in neurofeedback and biofeedback, I have pretty substantial training in what we call brainwave re-regulation. And then also just working with these three aspects of the mind: superconscious, or the oversoul, conscious and subconscious mind. And in fact, PSYCH-K really is the only of the deep change techniques that works with those three aspects of the mind in conjunction with brainwave re-regulation. And that's why it's so powerful, because the synergies of those two phenomena are extremely powerful. And but to speak to your question, the subconscious mind, I'd like to talk about the subconscious mind for a moment.
Please.
Thank you. It's kind of interesting how, most of us, like at some point, whether it was in college or just reading some book, learned about the subconscious mind, but we tend to forget it because we're, in this like ocean of information that's, usually disinformation. But the point is, the subconscious mind has two characteristics that are really critical in understanding how we can harness the mind, how we can harness it in conjunction with harnessing the neuroplasticity of our brain. The first is that it accounts for upwards of 95% of what really motivates us, because it's formulated or formed in our childhood, before ages 7 to 8, from infancy, even in utero, actually. And so it's kind of our programming that we get, from our authority figures, parents, and culture. And so, 95% versus 5% of the conscious mind, well, on the balance, like that's kind of a no-brainer, right? But in addition, it processes information at least 1 million times faster than the conscious mind. So it's another kind of like no-brainer on the balance, what are you going to choose? So, that combination of processing speed capacity as well as just the sheer volume, the 95%, we have to remember that the subconscious mind is our friend, and that we want to harness it. The issue, however, most people kind of buy that or understand that. The issue is that it's very resistant to change. It's just the way it's designed. It acts like a gatekeeper. And so whether we have a physical issue or a emotional or spiritual, mental, whatever, we can always address it at the subconscious level of the mind. It's not can we, it's how do we, and how do we do it efficiently and effectively? Well, through muscle testing is the most efficient and effective way of accessing the subconscious mind that acts like a gatekeeper, because in the past we've had these sort of archaic, methods. Hypnotherapy, is credible, but I mean, it's an ancient technique. And moreover, and more importantly, we are dependent, when we're dependent on another sort of authority, to do the process for us, we lose our self-sovereignty. And obviously we know, that's the name of the game in these times. That's exactly what we're aiming for, not to reduce it, but to increase it. So with PSYCH-K, when we work with the subconscious mind, it's strictly nonverbal. I mean, we're just doing the muscle testing to get those electrical signals that give us a yes and no, that, kind of guide us in the direction of the balance. But getting back to your question, so the subconscious mind, it really controls most of how we're going through our day, because of the fact that it's programmed, and because of its power, and because of its that ratio, 95 versus 5%.
Yeah, it's like a computer, basically. It's
Yeah,
kind of like,
yeah, and that's how Rob, thinks of it. I don't really think of it so much as, the brain is a much more, I guess we could think of it as our computer and our, physical body, our vessel, but I mean, it's so much more complex. It's so much, this incredible,
oh, yeah.
like, it's a miracle in a way. Our
Yeah.
brain is
But I'm
far
saying,
beyond, it has much more capacity than just the binary capacity of a computer, right? It has the spiritual, everything.
oh, yeah. But I'm saying between like the conscious and the subconscious, the conscious won't remember what the subconscious will. Like if you asked your conscious what you had like a week ago for dinner, it probably wouldn't remember, but your subconscious has it stored. Am I
Yeah,
correct?
and especially when we see the subconscious, one of the other characteristics is that it accesses long-term memory, i.e. childhood, right?
Right.
So, it really is kind of the boss when it comes to cognition. And we could also think of the subconscious mind in a sense as sort of like our emotions. It's like humanity. I don't know anyone that's ever really defined the mind. It's a very abstract concept. The brain's a little easier, obviously, it's an organ, can be, examined, but the subconscious mind, throughout the millennia, it's always been a topic of sort of controversy and wonder. I mean, it's a mystery. It's like this great ocean of innate wisdom. We can use a lot of analogies, but one thing we know is that we have to pay attention to it, we have to harness it, and more importantly, we have to reprogram it. And that, really is the purpose of PSYCH-K, is to align our subconscious motivations with our subconscious intent, with our conscious mind intentions. Our conscious mind intentions, that's why affirmations really don't work that well, because it's all conscious mind. We really have to work with the subconscious level of the mind, and when we do, then we really reach that self-empowerment, and we can really experience peak performance. And I might also add, PSYCH-K is extremely effective for trauma. In fact, I specialize in trauma, and I came to it from having experienced trauma, unfortunately. But I like to talk about trauma because it's so endemic now in our world after COVID. We've had 2 years of collective trauma. We all have, of course, individual trauma. And then there's a whole realm of ancestral trauma. There's just this sort of kaleidoscope of trauma that we're just starting to understand is such an engine in contemporary culture. And that one thing we know about trauma is we have to stop normalizing it. Because we tend to diminish, because the
it's like
first response is to like resist. I mean, it's a healthy, normal response, but that's why, I'm really committed to demystifying trauma and talking about it. It's like grief was back in the 70s, it was still cloaked, and trauma is the same way. But after COVID, if there was anything constructive that occurred, it enabled us to really decloset trauma and to just understand, to heal trauma.
Yeah, trauma wasn't talked about. You're like swept under the rug. If you experienced it, it was like, oh, get over it, or pull yourself up by the bootstraps type of thing.
Right.
That's what the parent or whoever teacher would say, it was like basically brushed off as no big deal, when in essence, it is a huge deal.
It's everything. It's it has so much impact on our brain and
Our lives.
Our lives, not to mention our culture, our entire experience here on Earth as humanity.
Yeah, as who we be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. So why don't you describe, if you would, for us, the method you use to transform self-limiting subconscious beliefs?
Sure. Well, I think I alluded to it earlier. Basically, the whole goal of doing a PSYCH-K, we call it a balance. We use the word balance both as a noun and a verb, is to experience the whole brain state. And the whole brain state is a result of two events. One is this brainwave re-regulation that occurs. And the second is enabling the subconscious and the conscious minds to communicate more easily than normal. normal than they normally can because of that resistance thing, that gatekeeper kind of dynamic with the subconscious mind. It's always trying to protect, that original subconscious programming. So these two events that occur, the result is what we call the whole brain state. And all that really means, and this is a gross oversimplification, but we want to try to keep things simple and accessible and easy to understand. But most people today are pretty smart. I mean, most people today know that we have two hemispheres of our brain because of all the degenerative cognitive issues, Alzheimer's, et cetera. Everybody's afraid of getting them, so people want to keep their brains really healthy. But the point is, so we create equilibrium across the two hemispheres of the brain, which become out of balance. Typically when there's trauma tends to lodge in certain areas of the brain. And so when we do these balances and we experience brainwave regulation, as well as the subconscious mind and conscious mind communicating more easily, so the subconscious mind can change and can transform and can reprogram, then we experience the whole brain state. And ultimately, the whole brain state leads to whole brain thinking. And there's a lot of research coming out right now in the neuroscience field on whole brain thinking. It's been around since the 1960s. Split brain theory was discovered in the 60s at UCLA when neurofeedback just started to evolve. But basically, that is what occurs. And I would recommend, for anybody that's watching, to go on my website, and I have two videos. My website is wholebrainbalancing.com. There are two videos under the sessions page. One is by Bruce and one is by Rob. The video by Rob is titled The Psychology of Change, and it gets into like the how of a balance. He demonstrates how a balance actually implements these two phenomena. It's a little too technical for me to get into here, but what's I hope helpful to understand is that it's really specific. I mean, it's like when we're working with subtle, as when we're working with subtle energy modalities, the key is precision, right? I mean, it's kind of a paradox, but precision is everything. Otherwise, it just becomes, very amorphous, and that's what leads to a lot of skepticism, I think. But at any rate, that is essentially what occurs, and so this whole brain state, which leads to whole brain living, ultimately, the ideal is to heighten higher consciousness on a global level, and we do it, one at a time. We take responsibility for our own shadow work, for our own internal work. We do this sort of reprogramming so that we can reach our potential, so that we can experience peak performance and self-empowerment. I mean, that really, right. In a nutshell, that's what it's all about.
So let me ask you, does it normally take more than once? Or
that's a great question. Yeah, great question. Many people are curious about two things. How can you do this online, remotely? We work in the quantum field. We've been trained, for decades how to work in the quantum field. By the way, PSYCH-K has been around since 1988. It's not exactly, a newcomer. It's just that, Bruce is our biggest champion, and people are slowly starting to learn about PSYCH-K. But I'm sorry, would you ask me that question about again?
I said, does it take?
Oh, how many sessions? Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it varies depending on what the issue is, but.
Well, yes, it does. So as I said, the biggest questions are how do you do it, remotely online? And the other one, in regards to how many sessions, is totally unlike talk therapy, where there's just this constant, right? Mm-hmm. It's just this constant visiting and talking, and it's kind of hard to get really measurable results for the average person, and I speak from experience. So we typically say between 6 to 12 sessions is kind of a benchmark. But in my experience working with trauma, both myself and, I've worked with hundreds of clients over the decade or so, it really is dependent largely, and very few people really speak to this as frankly or directly as I do. It depends on the degree of trauma that the brain has and the mind have experienced. And this is how I came to this work. I was really dissatisfied with the other deep change techniques. They didn't seem to really make much difference. And I just was pretty desperate. And I, happily had this opportunity, not just to learn from, these giants, but then to become a facilitator myself. So we usually say between 6 to 12 sessions, and a session is typically about an hour and a half long. It's a very fast, quick, and easy change process anyone can do. And it's relatively affordable, especially compared to neurofeedback, which is relatively unaffordable. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we get any further, and I forget to ask you, I know a lot of people know, but a lot of people don't know. How does muscle testing? What is that? How does it work?
Yeah.
Some people have probably never heard of it.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and we should never, presume just because we, have had all this experience.
Exactly. You and I know, but
yes, exactly. Well, I think a good example is chiropractic, because, the chiropractic profession has come such a long way in the past, 20, 30 years. It's like now insurance pays for it. I mean, it's become mainstream, basically. And there are considerable number of chiropractors that utilize muscle testing, or what we call applied kinesiology, in their practice to have a more precise sort of diagnostic about where the adjustment needs to be made. And so muscle testing, basically, and I think I mentioned this earlier, works with the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal column, to gauge electrical signals that are binary. We interpret them either as a yes or no. There's no gray, there's no in between, there's no maybe. And there are different ways of doing it. There's probably like 30 ways of doing muscle testing. The way I do it, I use my fingers to try to pull apart. If I can't, that's a strong, and that means yes. And if I can, that's a weak, and that means no. In PSYCH-K, we can also put our arm out to the side. But basically, we're applying some pressure somewhere, on the body, and making a statement, and then getting either a yes or no. And then we apply that yes or no to whatever the statement was. And it's kind of like a flow chart. You just keep following the strong or the yes statements. So, and that's really in a nutshell how it works. And the beauty, is that it's nonverbal. We're bypassing that conscious mind. And I think what's also important to mention is that PSYCH-K, in my experience, truly is the only comprehensively holistic deep change technique, because it works with the body, where, with this muscle testing, subconscious mind is really in the body, works with the body, the mind, the emotions, and the spirit. But that's the best way I can explain muscle testing. I have a document I usually share with people, if they don't have any experience.
well, I think one of the easiest ways, because like you said, there's numerous ways, and different ways work for different people. Everyone has their, I guess, favorite is a good way to put it. And I think one of the easiest ones and the most efficient, where people aren't thinking, am I doing this or whatever, is the standing one, where if it's a yes, you lean forward, and if it's a no, you go backwards.
Right.
And,
yeah, it's pretty
and
simple.
it's kind of cool, because you can use it in your everyday life. Like if you're at the grocery store and it's like, is this good for me? You can ask, and you'll get your answer, yes or no.
Right.
And it's subtle, and it's like no one's really, you can use it in your everyday life as well.
It's very practical. And importantly, it just bypasses, the conscious mind that has all these biases that.
And it's not based on your opinion or your past opinions or experiences. It's a definite yes or no.
Right. Well, yeah, an electrical signal from the nervous system is kind of hard to argue with.
Exactly.
It's just what it is.
Exactly. So it's really an awesome tool.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And increasingly, I think, it's become, fairly mainstream. I think many people, if they don't know about it, they've heard about it, and they're sort of curious, well, how does it work? But yeah, it's invaluable. It really is.
And another way a lot of people use it too is, or close to it, is the pendulum. That's another.
Right. or dowsing, pendulum
Yeah.
dowsing.
Right,
similar.
exactly.
Mhm.
But I wanted to bring up the standing one only because sometimes people get confused with the pulling, or, they wonder if they're doing it subconsciously. Well, it is subconscious, but they're worried that they're making it happen. In other
Yeah,
words, that
well,
it's not unnatural.
yeah, and there's a little, I'll just speak to that briefly. I mean, there is some validity to the subjective factor at play in self muscle testing. There is some validity that there could be some subjective skew. And so, in my view, it's always preferred to have someone else do muscle testing for you, if
I
possible.
agree.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, I know one girl that uses her arm.
Mm-hmm.
She presses on it,
Mm-hmm.
and if it goes down or up, determines, which is,
Yep.
I've never seen that one before till just the other day, and I was
Yeah,
really,
there are really dozens of
yeah, it's
techniques.
endless. Yeah, totally. But it is very effective, very effective. Hard to argue with, like you said.
Right.
So let me ask you this: what benefits can be expected from experiencing the whole brain state?
Well, I guess in context, we want to recognize that in our culture today, and it's not just Western culture anymore, it's global culture, technology is king. AI, is now starting to encroach on our very, definition of so many things, not just technology, but humanity, intelligence, etc. And so, we've got this like sort of lopsided left brain, the analytical approach, and this, driven by the whole Newtonian philosophy. So, if it's one thing that we're starting to understand, especially since COVID, it's the value of the natural world. Right? The natural world is sort of our antidote. And so, when we look at the natural world, all we need to do is just go out in the natural world, and we sort of instantly feel not just, of course, connection with the earth, which is so critical, but we also feel our stress levels diminish. And, I think everyone would agree, we live in extraordinarily stressful and traumatic times because we're in this phenomenal period of transition and transformation. So everything is accelerated. And so stress and trauma, again, have become almost the norm. It's unfortunately the norm. And we're seeking, how to kind of get that feeling that comes about when we're communing with nature that can really like be long lasting, that can really have an impact that's very sort of permanent. And the way to do this is ultimately we have to work with our body mind, and we can, and we have the tools now, and we have these sort of advanced techniques. But I think that whole brain thinking, using both the yin and the yang sides of the brain, when we look at some of the ancient cultures, that were so much further advanced, or when we look at some of the cultures today on the planet that, where there's a lot of longevity and a much healthier lifestyle, there really is whole brain thinking. There really is this kind of, balanced approach where there's a honoring and respect for both, the
Right.
yin and the yang aspect. So I just look at it from the perspective that, we've got such a distorted view living in this high tech world. We always want the latest version of everything.
Or
And
everything yesterday. Let's put it that way.
exactly, instant gratification. Yeah, speed.
Yeah.
So, there's just, it's just a very, it's all about quality of life, I think ultimately.
And it's being in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that with the cell phones, people can't be in the moment anymore. They're in, the cell phones got their undivided attention. It's almost become like a appendage to our body.
Yeah. Well, it's all part of the narrative. I think it's very addictive. There's, it's very easy when we're not addressing our trauma, then, to develop addictions, whether it's, screen culture or whatever it is. There's so many choices. But I think it's just, a reflection of sometimes we don't even realize it. We just become so numbed,
Yes.
right, to the
Very good.
constant stress and trauma that we're experiencing. And I think especially post-COVID, now we're being called to recover.
Yeah, I think COVID brought it to a peak. It was there prior to COVID, but COVID was kind of like what pushed it over the, to make it so it's so well accepted and so aware. Because I don't think anyone didn't experience stress with this last 2.5 years.
Yeah. And the stress was particularly difficult for children and young people. I mean, we see that reflected, in the suicide rates. It's particularly, heinous for elders in nursing homes that are already isolated, who couldn't have visitors. I mean, it really was a very cruel period. Just I think it'll take a while for us to really recover.
Well, everyone was affected, and in more ways than one. Let's be real. Our lives changed, whether you wanted them to or not. You were affected. So let me ask you this. What different ways, can you give like a few examples of ways that you've helped people with this technique? And
Sure.
then maybe name one or two of what your favorite results were, or you don't have to mention names, of course, we don't want to do that, but.
Yeah, there's so many things. I mean, anything can be addressed. Any kind of habit, any kind of, belief, because we're working with beliefs. I mean, I guess I didn't even mention the most important thing. We're working with subconscious beliefs, and beliefs shape our attitudes. They shape our worldview. And I mean, I didn't mention it because I guess I always feel, I mean, isn't that at this point pretty obvious that we have to work with our beliefs, because they really create the filter, the lens that we see reality through. So it could be any kind of belief about really anything. It could have to do with body image. Mostly, I would say it's emotional issues, because most of our beliefs that we can't work with very well on our own are a result of trauma or distress at the very least. And so any kind of belief that, we just feel we can't make progress, we can't change it on our own. PSYCH-K addresses, I guess, everything from, like, as I said, body image, like weight loss, self-esteem issues, relationships, work, career, finances. I mean, absolutely anything is fair game. Any kind of belief that we suffer the consequences, and usually they're beliefs that are ancestral. They're just in our DNA. Or
how about addictions?
Well, addiction is something we can address because it's typically the top layer of the wounding that comes from unresolved trauma. It could take a little bit longer because that degree of trauma is more pronounced, and so more sessions would be more work. But yeah, certainly. I mean, addiction is just so common, and whether
there's
it's
so many forms.
Precisely, yeah. Screen addiction is probably the newest flavor, and it's so insidious because we're so dependent, right, on all of this information. But I think I'll just reference briefly, my own personal experience, because as I said, I do specialize in trauma. I trained with Thomas Hubel in the past couple of years, and I love to work with trauma because it's all nonverbal. The worst thing we can do with trauma is verbalize. So any kind of trauma, whether it's a small event, whether it's developmental from childhood or some kind of shock event, it's very easy to release trauma. And trauma and addiction, kind of go hand in hand. I think I alluded to that. So it's just a question of like facing our trauma, facing our distress, facing our fears and our shadows. But once we do, and we get, the support and the assistance we need, I mean, it's very liberating. And then, we live a bigger life. We live a more contributive life once we're not in that sort of prison. And that's how, as I think I've mentioned a couple of times, that's what brought me to PSYCH-K. I was seeking. I wasn't really finding, the kind of solutions I kind of knew were out there. I had no clue that it would be grounded in science. I'm not really a science person, but I think that's one of these strong suits that PSYCH-K brings to the table, is that, it has considerable, not just epigenetics, but I mentioned earlier, neurofeedback, validation. And, we live in a scientific culture, and we look to that for evidence-based. But any belief, I would say, that one has, that one wants to shift, transform, change, it's very easy. It's not difficult. This is an extremely kind of elegant modality that's unlike anything you've ever experienced. And it really is unparalleled. It's my experience. There's nothing competitive. There's nothing that can compete with this brain and mind synergy. It's very powerful.
That's awesome. And it's also good too that you've had your own trauma, because that makes it more relatable. People always think, oh, what do you know? You've never experienced.
Yeah.
And it's not true. You have.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's a sign of the times, right? I mean, if you're really living,
yeah,
at some point you're going to pick
true.
up.
And we all have childhood that
right.
We were raised certain ways.
Exactly.
And they were not always the best ways.
Yeah, there's no perfect parents.
No, because they learned from theirs. It's like
right.
generation. Mm-hmm. So it's like a good way to stop the generation, especially if you have children, where you can stop that by going and doing the PSYCH-K brain balancing with you.
Right.
Yeah. So what's give it me, like I asked before, we talked about a lot of things. What, like, one of your best success stories of working with someone?
I think a client I have now who, when I first spoke to him, and I think we're getting a little short on time, so I'll make this brief. The first thing he told me was that he's the type of person that nothing works for him, right? He's tried everything, kind of like me in a way, and nothing's ever worked. And why should this work? And,
a lot of people have that.
Yeah. Understandably skeptical. And I, at the time I was, a little put off, but now I almost welcome that type of, I mean, we really say to traditional therapists, give us your toughest case and, we can help this person. But anyway, he just had a lot of issues regarding self-esteem and, abundance issues, financial, family, the usual menu. Right? And the reason I mention him is he's done almost 20 sessions. Then he really was committed. He, even in the moments of discouragement or whatever, he just stayed with it over, it's almost 4 years now. So probably one of my longest clients. And now this man is an expert. He is an expert in cryptocurrency. He is a global expert in cryptocurrency security systems. He has come so far.
That's
and
awesome.
He's speaking, he's doing all these speaking engagements, and it sometimes in that instance, it's staggering. And so I mentioned that as a very good example. And I think it's like anything, when you commit and you stay with it and you just, hang in there, really, there will be a transformation. It's not going to happen overnight, but with PSYCH-K, you can see results, within a matter of months.
Yeah, I always say it took you how many years to get there? Because
right.
we've got all these beliefs, etc., programmed in us
exactly
years. So it's not going to usually happen overnight that it's all going to be better.
Exactly.
It's going to take a few. And it all depends on commitment is very important. You have to,
Right.
as a person,
Well, and
want
yeah,
it.
and Judy, I think the bottom line, is the technology. I don't really like that word, but I mean, this is a cognitive technology. And if the technology, if it's the latest version and if it's, the most effective and efficient, well, like, why wouldn't you use it? Why would you use
Exactly.
an old technology of anything? You wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. It applies to everything. It's like, would you go get an old vehicle when you can have a
Right.
new one? No.
Well, and that's the irony, we take better care of our cars and our computers than we do our brains, right? I mean, like, what's that
A
about?
lot of people, it's because they don't know they can take care of them.
Right.
Truthfully, that's why you're on here, to let
Yeah.
people know
Yeah.
that there is a
Well,
way.
And I think the
Okay.
bottom line is we need to demystify. We
Yeah.
need to demystify, just this orientation, to our health. And
Yes.
it goes back to the self-sovereignty where, we're smart. There's all the information's out there. It's just a question of stepping out and learning and, being with other people that can share their experiences. So yeah, it's a pretty exciting frontier. It really is.
Yes, it's a great time to be alive.
Yeah, it's like the best of times and the worst of times. But if you focus on the best of times, yeah, it's exciting.
Yes, it is. So how can people get a hold of you?
Oh, thanks. My website is whole, WHOLE, wholebrainbalancing.com. And just visit my website, watch the videos. There's a couple of videos, all kinds of resources. Contact me. I offer a complimentary phone consultation to see if this is a good fit. And
That's very important.
yeah, I'm always happy to talk to people. And then there's PSYCH-K International, PSYCHK.com. That's Rob's website where you can look for classes and facilitators all over the world. And I'm also, available by phone. My phone number is on my, I live in North Carolina on the Eastern time zone. So I'm always happy to talk to people, always happy to share PSYCH-K. It's totally changed my life. And, I really love to extend the opportunity to just step into your power, step into your fulfillment, your happiness, and just understand the conditioning is not a life sentence.
That's right.
Childhood conditioning is not a life sentence.
And you can change your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not that hard.
It's not. Just change your brain, change your life.
Sounds pretty easy to me.
Yeah.
So I want everyone to know that this video will also be on YouTube under Back to Love Movement. And also it will be on my website, www.backtolovemovement.com. So if you want to revisit it, please do. And Paula, I can't thank you enough for sharing all your knowledge and your expertise with me today and everyone out there. And please, if anyone would like to do some changing, you know where to go.
Thank you, Judy. It's my pleasure. It's really been fun.
Thanks, Paula.
Okay.
Love tall.
Bye-bye.
Bye.